Screen time is a huge issue for parents today. You're seeing anxiety, depression that are linked to social media.
What would you do in this situation?
One of the strongest factors in a child's resiliency is having warm parental influence. Effort over results is a key component of an amazing parenting style.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Effort Over Results podcast and to season 2, where we are focusing on child development through the EOR lens. I'm your host, Quinn Magnuson, and today's guest is Dr. Lindsay Emmerson, clinical psychologist, mom of 4, and parenting coach who helps families build resilient, confident kids. We're talking about resilience, intentional parenting, and how high-performance lessons support young athletes and developing minds. Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me here, Quinn.
So I want to talk about unconditional positive regard. And I think that basically is a good way of reinforcing the effort over results mantra, which is recognizing the effort your kids have put in, not focusing on the results necessarily. We can acknowledge the results, but we really want to reinforce for our children, for our athletes, for our students, that they put the effort in and that they can build resilience through learning through those losses and areas where they may not have done successfully. But talk more about unconditional positive regard, and let's get rolling.
There's a critical mistake parents make between ages 6 and 11 that determines whether their child will hide struggles or come to them for help during the turbulent teen years. After working with hundreds of families, I've seen a devastating pattern. Parents who tie their love to performance during elementary school end up with anxious, perfectionistic teens who won't ask for help. Those who master unconditional positive regard, their teens actually want to talk to them.
Absolutely. This is a concept that is really core to my whole parenting philosophy. And this term, unconditional positive regard, goes back to psychologist Carl Rogers. It's been around for decades. It's very well known within the psychology community and is becoming more integrated into just popular uses and especially in parenting. So this concept is the idea that each of us, are, as parents, as kids, as anybody in the world, each of us has unique value, and we are worthy. We are worthy of being seen. We're worthy of being understood. We're worthy of being loved and valued. And from a parenting perspective, that means that your child, just by nature of being your child, is an important part of your family that deserves respect, deserves attention, deserves to feel like they belong and they are valued always. And we separate that from their actual day-to-day behaviors. So this is really key in parenting because kids by nature are learning. It's their whole job in life, right? Every day they're learning new things. And learning is a trial and error process. And so kids make mistakes. They make messes. They hit siblings. They say things that are quite rude, constantly making mistakes. And it's a learning process that we as parents get to shape them into the kids who are one day much more careful, much more gentle, much more respectful. And it doesn't happen overnight. And so there's a lot of feedback that needs to go into the whole parenting process. And when you apply this concept of unconditional positive regard, you're giving that feedback in a loving, nurturing, teaching way rather than a shaming, yelling, sort of authoritarian parenting way. So it's a totally different mindset shift, and it helps make for more connected families, and it helps your child get on the right trajectory to developing the skills that they need while also maintaining their healthy sense of self and becoming resilient by learning I can overcome these processes of learning how to be respectful, learning how to interact with others. It's all doable. It's all something that I can do, and it helps them so much in the long run.
So something I mentioned before the show, we were chatting, and I talked about myself as a Gen X parent. So my children were born in 2000 and 2002, so they're Gen Z children. And something that I espouse now, but what I didn't know then as a young father in 2000, we were taught, we were messaged, and this is before social media. So this is now through commercials, through books we're reading, back in, even the 1900s, late 90s. But it's, we were taught as young parents to build our child's confidence through nonstop compliments. Tell them how smart they are, whether they were or weren't, how handsome and beautiful they were, how athletic they were. Just keep reminding them of that. And we did that. And this isn't just me saying this, but it feels like psychologists now are saying that we developed a generation of children, Gen Z, that had no resilience. They can't respond well to feedback. They basically just crumble in the face of adversity, because when you're told nonstop how great you are, if you're not, you're trying to stay up to that standard, thinking, I was told I was great. I was told I was handsome and beautiful. I was athletic and I was smart. Why is this all coming down all around me? Um, let's talk about that philosophy of the early 2000s and what it did to Gen Z.
Okay, this is a great question, Quinn. And I have three thoughts in response. So, first of all, as parents, we're always just using the best information that we have at the time, right? Most parents want to be the best parent they can, but we don't always have the information that can best guide our practices. So, nobody should ever look back at their parenting from the late 90s or the early 2000s and feel like, I did it all wrong, right? Everybody's doing the best they can at the time. What we should be doing as parents is to be trying to digest new information along the way, which we spoke pre-interview about how you're doing this in your parenting. And I love that. I respect that. And that's what we should be doing, is just taking new information as it becomes available. So part two of this answer is, what's the new information? So yes, things have changed. And actually on social media, you often see posts now saying, don't compliment your kids. Don't tell your kids they're so smart. And so I'll come back to that in just a second. But the idea here is valid. There is newer research in the last decade or two really focusing on a concept called growth mindset. And
Mhm.
Carol Dweck is the main psychologist who's done the research in this area. Many more have followed and replicated this research. It's very valid. And what it shows is that kids who are told things like, you are smart, you are a good student, you're a good athlete, you are very capable, just you, it's all internalized.
Mhm.
And they think, oh gosh, I have to now live up to this role. So what if I know I'm smart, but what if this class that I want to take seems like it's going to be a real push for me? I don't think I want to do that because I may not get an A in it. I'm
It would.
now going to shy away from these challenges because it goes against this internal vision of who I am, my sense of self-identity. And so what you find is that when kids have these beliefs of I am this way, that they then have a harder time embracing challenges. And as they get older, it should be pushing to the next level, should be moving on to the next challenge. So that counteracts what we want as parents for them. And that is called a fixed mindset, is I am this way. There's not much can do to change it. I have this certain level of skill and I need to just stay within my lane. The opposite of a fixed mindset is a growth mindset. So, this is where parents can impart upon their children this concept of, hey, my brain is constantly developing, especially in those first 25 years. Your brain is constantly developing, forming new neuronal connections, really learning new ways to integrate information. And so, as your brain develops, you then be able to acquire new skills, learn new things, challenge yourselves in new ways. And so parents can help teach their kids just the basic biology that this is a process, and then support them through that process by encouraging effort. So instead of saying, oh, good, you got that A, well done, you're so smart. Instead of that, you can say, hey, I noticed you studied really hard for this math test. And hey, you went up 5% from your last one. That is serious progress. And it shows that that hard work is paying off. And so you're validating the effort that goes into it. You're validating the outcome, but you're not just writing it down to some internal factor of you're a smart kid. And so you can help kids with very brief interventions. You can help kids shift this mindset. And a lot of schools are teaching growth mindset in school. My kids have it in our local Santa Barbara public school system. A lot of parents who are listening will probably recognize some of this from what their kids are bringing home from school. And the teachers are starting to recognize this. It's a great phenomenon. And so parents can really support their kids by guiding them along this journey of growth rather than putting them in a box that they then have to live up to and may feel like they can't take challenges anymore because it might change the way that their parents think about them. And then the third little part I just want to touch on is
Yeah.
in parenting, it all comes down to balance. So it's not saying don't ever tell your kid they're smart. It's not it's not a black and white thing. It's totally fine to say to your kid, "Oh my gosh, you are so smart." But also pair that frequently with praising the effort and helping them to really appreciate how the hard work goes into the progress. So I don't ever want people to be afraid, "Oh, I told my kid they were smart." It's totally fine. Just do both.
Yeah, and I like what you said about balance because I think it's okay to use those words, to tell. Because I mean, if they are athletic, if they are talented, if they are smart, it's okay. But I would suggest it's almost an 80-20 rule, right? And that's sort of the philosophy we have with effort over results is, 20% can be, messaging of acknowledging the result of what they've accomplished. And we're not about in my audience, like we're not talking just about your own children. We do talk about teachers and students. We're talking about coaches and their athletes, and especially, and we're going to dive into this, Lindsay, is employers and employees, which is going to be a very interesting conversation. But it's a balance. But you should recognize the effort because the effort is what people can control.
Mhm.
They can't control the
Absolutely.
results. So when you base your messaging solely on results, as the person hearing the messaging, I'm like, it's a sense of well, it's a no-win situation because I can't control that. And when we switch that messaging to the effort recognition, it's like, hey, I can control that. I'll just keep doing that. And then your child begins to work harder and put the effort in, knowing that they won't be punished for the result that comes out. I want to talk about parenting styles. And I'm sure through your PhD studies, you looked at the different parenting styles. And I'm not going to go too far back, but I do want to go back to the turn of the 20th century. And when you think about, the parenting styles of each generation from the early 1900s through the mid-century through to the late 1900s and now 2000s, Gen X, Gen Z, we won't know if this philosophy of parenting, growth mindset, recognizing effort over result, things like that, we don't have the data on whether that really worked or not. Probably for another, let's say decade to have enough quantitative data to really decide, right? We do know from the early 2000s, as we've already discussed, that Gen Z children of Gen X parents do have this fear of failure. They do have this perfectionism going. What have you seen in your studies of parenting styles, though, and the data that comes from them? And are there any parenting styles from the past that are still around today? Because what I'm going to ask you, Lindsay, is there's going to be parents out there listening to the show. They're going to go, this is all woo woo, kumbaya BS. My kid is disciplined and they're going to do what I tell them to do. And I'm just going to recognize stuff that when they achieve, right? How do we find the parenting styles of the past mixing in with the new growth mindset, effort over results philosophy?
I love that you brought up parenting styles. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. Just real fast, circling back to what you said, though, Quinn, about tracking the effort instead of just the outcome. It's
Mhm.
so funny that we're meeting at the start of the new year when people are doing
Right.
their New Year's resolutions. There's a lot of data that supports that if you set effort based goals or
Yep.
resolutions, you're going to have a much better outcome than if you set terminal goal outcomes. So if you say, I want you to get an A in your math class, that's going to be much harder and not very fulfilling for your child, much more challenging than if you say, I want us to set a goal that every Wednesday, we're going to check in and make sure your homework is done. And if not, we can get it done that night because I know it's due every Friday. And
Mm,
so when you set these effort-based outcomes, you're going to have a much better experience with meeting goals. And
yeah,
so I'd love to just impart that on parents to help their kids in that way at the start of the new year.
yeah.
Coming back to parenting styles. So when you talk about parenting styles, a lot of terms come to mind. Parents will hear things on social media: helicopter parenting, tiger parenting, free range parenting, all these things. When you actually look at psychology research, which has looked at parenting style for decades and decades, we have a lot of data here. When you analyze parents and you examine how they interact with their children, and you do the statistical analyses to pull the core components across all different kinds of parents, different cultures, different age children, and you pull the core components, you do a statistical analysis called a factor analysis, and you can break it down consistently into four main parenting styles. And so, not everybody's familiar with these terms. I talk a lot about these terms on social media, and so I think more and more people are becoming aware of it. There are four main styles. So, there's an authoritarian parent. That's more the because I said so, harsh punishments. Just, I'm going to tell them the rules. They must stick to the rules. There'll be punishment if they don't.
Mm,
That is more becoming more of an outdated parenting style. And that is good because it's associated with less positive outcomes as kids age. The next style that you want to avoid is permissive parenting. That's the total opposite. So here you're talking about just letting kids make all the rules. Oh, you're not tight. Okay, let's stay up later. Oh, you want to have dessert first? Let's just do that every night. And so permissive parents, just anything goes. Very hard for those parents to set boundaries and set expectations for their child. Also associated with negative outcomes. The third one you want to avoid is less common. It's neglectful or indifferent parenting. Probably anybody listening to this podcast is not going to fall in that domain. And then finally, we have the gold standard. So consistently across so many studies, across so many different outcomes, you find authoritative parenting to be the gold standard, the winner. And authoritative parenting is balancing warmth and responsiveness and loving and connection and all that good stuff with boundaries and expectations, high expectations, enforcing boundaries. It's that combination that helps kids feel secure, it helps them to thrive, and it helps to create lasting positive family bonds. And when I talk about outcomes, I'm talking about everything from better behavior, less substance abuse, higher grades, better jobs in the future, better health in the future, so many positive outcomes to authoritative parenting. Now, personally, I find that term authoritative to be very similar to authoritarian. And so I just,
Yeah, you mixed me up there for a second because I thought, did you repeat yourself? So authoritative
so
and authoritarian. Got it.
I catch myself making that mistake all the time,
They
Quinn.
need to come
So
up with a new word.
I did. So I stopped using the term authoritative parenting. I call it amazing parenting because, in my mind, if you can combine that warmth with those expectations and you can consistently show that to your child, it's not perfect parenting. It doesn't have to be 100% of the time, but consistently, that, in my mind, is amazing parenting.
I'm going to
Mhm.
use this opportunity for therapy.
Mhm.
But I have a question. When would you associate the word and the term potential with growth mindset? And let me explain why I'm asking that question. Because one of the things that I look back now and I struggled with, I didn't then because I figured it was just part of parenting. But our family, my wife, myself, like I played sports at the highest level, professional football. My wife played university basketball. Both our kids, my son is a scholarship football player in the States. My daughter went on to a discus scholarship in the United States for a year before COVID, but very athletic, okay, very driven. But the one thing as a parent is I always want my kids to see and reach and feel their potential and go for really I don't want to I don't want to go so far as to say maximize potential, but understand that they just have so much more to give. They have so many God-given talents and abilities that they can continue to grow. Now, some people might look at the way I parented as being a bit authoritarian, that first one you described, because I demanded a lot from my kids. I'm like, you can't just sit on your my grandpa would say, took us,
Mhm.
and get anything out of life. Like you need to push yourself. You don't realize the potential you have. And I kind of heard from both sides, like people saying, "Oh, you're being too hard on the kids. Like, you know, you got to let them kind of figure it out for themselves." But then I'll be like, "No, no, that's a good way to." So how do you match, you know, the parent who wants their child to reach their potential, but not go into that authoritarian "do as I say" philosophy, but more
Mhm.
of the growth mindset? How do we bring those two together?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So, one thing that I teach parents in my parent coaching membership is to really think about your family goals and be intentional about how you structure your family's week, your family's month, your family's year. And it's that's going to look very different across families. So, we have worksheets to have people help figure out what their goals are, but and it may change across ages. So, for example, when my kids were younger, we had a lot of access to water, swimming pools, lakes, etc. So one of our family goals was to raise really good sleepers. Or not, not really good sleepers. I'm simultaneously thinking my other goal was to have good sleepers, to raise really good
That was
swimmers.
my daughter. She was a great sleeper.
Yeah. Well, so both that's another family goal. It's very
Yeah.
important to me I was a stay-at-home mom from all my children's early years, and you put a lot of work into being a stay-at-home mom. You're with them all day.
Yeah.
And come bedtime, you want them to be good sleepers. So those are two very big family goals for their safety, swimming, and for my sanity, sleep.
There you go.
Sleep also has a lot of great benefits for kids too. So those are two of our big family goals. And so in the early years, we put a lot of time and energy and really intention into making that happen. And one thing parents can do is think about, what are my goals? How am I going to help guide my child along there? And a really important concept in parenting, especially younger kids, but really continuing at all ages, is the concept of choices and helping your child to develop autonomy so that A, they develop more independence, and B, they become more cooperative, because when you allow them autonomy in everything that doesn't really matter, like what color shirt to wear or what sport to do, all these things that really don't matter that much in the grand scheme of things, let them have autonomy there. But then do be intentional and do set family expectations around the things that do matter. Like, I want you in a sport. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be this sport or that sport, you choose. But at this age, I want you to start a sport. And so, if that's a family goal of yours to get your child involved in sports, decide at age. If you have more than one child, it is important to have some consistency. So for our family, we decided that by second grade, you need to enroll each term, so fall, spring, and summer, you need to be enrolled in some physical activity. We go very broadly. It doesn't have to be an organized sport. It doesn't have to be a team sport or an independent sport. It has to be a physical activity,
Mm.
because for us, as much as we want them to experience sports, both my husband and I did sports, we loved them. We would love for them to have the experience. Even more important was to impart this concept of lifelong physical fitness. And so we said any physical activity. So one of my kids is not huge into sports. So he every Wednesday goes with some buddies and they go do a beach camp where they go down to the beach and they play in the water and they build sandcastles, and it's physical and it's outdoors, and it's setting him up with a lifelong love of outdoors and physical activity. And so it doesn't have to be a rigid, do it this way, do it that way, but you can help your kids by deciding what are the important values for your family, what are the important goals, and then providing the boundaries to help shape them along that path, and then giving them choices and autonomy so that they can then successfully navigate that and really have a good experience, have fun, in addition to getting the benefit of being in that activity.
Yeah. Actually, now that I look back on it and what you just said, Lindsay, is that my wife and I, we actually dated 5 years before we got married, and we talked a lot about raising our children and how we would raise them. And there were some differences, but a lot of similarities. Once again, both athletic families. What we decided is we always wanted our kids to be involved in something active. We just called it active, and something creative. So throughout the year, they would have to be, and they could pick the sport or whatever, or it doesn't have to be a sport. It could be, you know, taekwondo. It could be whatever, anything where they're active. And then creative was they had to, you know, be enrolled in, say, piano lessons or, you know, an art class or something, because we wanted to grow a well-rounded child. And so we use those active and creative year-round goals for our kids. Now they did lean a little more towards the sports that my wife and I played, which is fine, but I think we did a good job in that. It wasn't like you're going to play hockey, being from Canada. And I being professional football player, it's like you're going to play football. It's like, no, we told our son, like, do you want to do this? Because if you don't, right. So I loved what you said about that. It's a good mix, and I think it allows the child to kind of figure things out for themselves.
Mhm.
Um, I want to talk about the word resiliency because it is the dead horse at the side of the road that's been beat to death and kicked around for the last at least 3 to 5 years. This is a word that comes up in employment situations. It comes up on the sports fields. It comes up in the classroom. That this generation, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha now, have no resilience. Millennials to a certain extent too,
Mhm.
and I'm the old guy in the room saying that, but what have you learned or seen around that term resiliency? Has it been beaten to a point where people kind of don't even really know what it means, or it's just lip service to saying someone just isn't tough enough? Like, what do you teach parents in building resilient kids without having to use that word nonstop? And really, truly, to you, what does resiliency mean?
Yeah, great question. Resiliency is a really important concept. I actually taught a course at UCSB a couple years back on resiliency in youth to the graduate psychology students. But interestingly, even though it feels like it's beating a dead horse to you, a lot of parents aren't familiar with the term. I've had very bright parents who I bring up that term to, and they say, "Oh, what's resiliency?" So
Hmm.
there's still a lack of awareness of just this concept of resiliency. So it's great that you brought it up so we can talk some more about it.
Hmm.
Another thing that you run into sometimes is that people have heard the term, but what they think resiliency means is that kids never struggle or they never feel distress, that some kids just, float everything right off them, water off a duck, right? But that's not really the way that resiliency works. So resiliency is adapting well through adversity and not avoiding it. And that's a really important misconception because it can lead to overprotecting and not giving kids the opportunity to really build skills. So it's not that we need to protect our kids from these obstacles, it's that we need to give them reasonable obstacles along the way and teach them this process of adapting, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, how to adapt through these changes so that then they can be resilient to the big things that we can't anticipate. Traumas of various kinds happen frequently, and we can't prepare them for that level, but we can do what we can with the smaller challenges throughout the day. And again, it ties into that growth mindset concept. This was really tough, but you know what? I liked how we did this and that made it better. That's what we should probably do next time. And we do some problem solving tied into it. And it's a whole integrated system of skills that create a resilient child.
I I've come up with the one-liner that says, and this is to parents, coaches, teachers, and so forth. I say, first thing you're going to say to your child, student, whatever athlete, what would you do in this situation? How would you handle this? What do you think you should do? And man, the pressure it takes off you as a parent, teacher, educator, and employer. Like even as an employer, I was taught that because I was getting nonstop phone calls from my team. Like, what do we do here? Well, how do we handle this? Whatever. I go, well, how would you handle it? Okay, try that. Let's see what happens. Right? That's the autonomy you're talking about. That's giving permission for them to make a decision because now you basically said, I'm giving you that permission to make the decision to do whatever it is that you have suggested you want to do, and let's see what comes from it. Or I've said, well, you'll figure it out. Meaning, I'm saying, go ahead. And it's funny because we have all this philosophy and study behind, child rearing and parenting, and it all matters absolutely. But I feel like there's just some key words, key messaging that can just change. It's not a life hack, but it certainly can change the way you parent even if you add it just on a daily basis, something small. It's like James Clear, Atomic Habits, right? It's like we can't transform our entire family if it's completely dysfunctional, but you can start with small little messages, small little, intentions. How How has social media changed the way you handle parenting and parenting psychology and child psychology and families? Because I imagine doing what you do now, Lindsay, in 2026, um, probably completely different from someone who would be in your position in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
screen time is a huge issue for parents today. And I have a whole masterclass that I developed because parents are just so confused about what does the research tell us, and then how should I implement that with my family. And for ages 0 to 12, I always recommend very strict screen time limits. And so I have, age-based guidelines on number of hours per day and number of days per week and when you should take gaps and all that. Um, and then the specific type of media they should be seeing. And so 0 to 12, I would 100% say no social media. Social media has had a lot of negative impacts on our children. You're seeing huge rates of anxiety, depression that are very likely linked to social media. It's a little hard to say in the research, but there seems to be some very high correlations with the onset of social media. Um, there are also some benefits to social media, though.
Yeah.
I have a creative cooking daughter who gets so many recipes and runs into the kitchen. My son too, my 10-year-old son will come out and he says, "Mom, let's look up a recipe," and then he'll make it. And you can do that from a cookbook, but the social media is resonating more with their visual cues. They're wanting to be a part of something that's going on in the world right now. It's much more stimulating. And so there are some creative outlets. The other really important piece of why social media has been helpful, it's for kids who don't feel like they belong.
Mm,
So, especially if you're getting into kids with, like, LGBTY issues, then
mm.
you can feel like you're really isolated until you get on social media and say, "Oh, I'm not the only one. I'm just the only one in my town." And so there's some research that really supports some of the benefits of social media, but there are also major cons. Just more broadly, even just screen time use in general is an issue, and the number of hours you spend on screen time, and specifically what you miss by not being on screen time. So you're not going outside as much. You're not talking in person, face to face, making eye contact. Maybe you're not doing as many activities with your family because you'd rather be on your screens. Some gaming has been shown to be an issue for kids even more than social media. So there are a lot of different lines of research out here that we need to be paying attention to. We don't have the solid answers yet, but the
Mhm.
one thing the parents can feel 100% good about doing is limiting the amount of time that their child spends doing any of those screen activities. And it doesn't have to be super duper rigid. It doesn't have to be 10 minutes a day, but we're talking about when you get over an hour, 3 hours, then it starts to become an issue. And
I
so
think
there,
that's for anybody. That's not just for kids. That's for adults too. If I'm
100%.
sitting doom scrolling through Instagram for 2 hours, it affects me, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So social media is a big issue. To your point about going down the rabbit hole,
Mm.
absolutely had parents come to me and say, "Oh my gosh, my child now isn't going to bed because they said they're scared of Slenderman, and we just realized it's because it popped up on YouTube, and he should never even know what that is at his age." And so these things really do happen, and so you need to be keeping an eye on your child. With younger children, you need to be checking in on what they're doing. They can be using the tablet in front of you. You can be popping in and seeing what they're doing and frequently asking them, engage in a conversation. What you see today? How did that make you feel? Talk about the effects. When my kids started playing violent video games, we frequently talked about the effects. You seem a little edgy after playing that. I think that we should do a shorter amount next time. What do you think? And so speaking with them about educating them on how the algorithms work. So you realize that when you go down your feed, if you hover over something for more than 3 seconds, you're teaching the algorithm that that's what you want to see. So did you notice how you hovered over that and then more of that kind of content popped up? So just training them on how social media works can make them educated consumers and people who can curate their feed to something that's going to make them feel good and benefit them, as opposed to something that's just going to take them down a rabbit hole and then lean to that depression and anxiety that we're so worried about.
I think the word balance comes in, even more strongly now, and I think at some point we will not come full circle, but I think we'll realize with the Gen Z and millennial generation how horrible social media, I mean, once again, could be good too, but the effects it had on them, and now there's a bit of a pullback, and like I said, my daughter and her friends all claim, or not claim, but all profess that they understand how social media affected kids. Because between 2000 and 2012, it was kind of the Wild West.
Mhm.
Like there were no filters. There was nothing stopping, young boys from seeing pornographic sites, young girls going onto Tumblr and seeing horrible things. Like it was just literally zero filters, zero guardrails. Now there's more guardrails. And like you said, I think you said it was a Denmark that's no, who's it,
Australia.
Australia, sorry, yeah, 16. I don't know how they're going to enforce that because kids are really technically advanced. They can get around it, but at least there's something being recognized and now being adjusted to. And there's even this small movement from Gen Z aged, well, now they're almost adults, for the basically saying, I just want a flip phone again. I just want a phone that has literally just I can phone people and text people. That's it, right? And that's good because they're recognizing themselves. And this goes back to your parenting philosophy and what you bring in your practice and the effort over results is that, when you have these conversations with your kids and they feel like they can be open about it and you talk to them about, how did that make you feel? What were you thinking, when that happened? You build more mentally resilient kids because now they're able to work themselves through it. And I think that's a beautiful thing in that not everything is going to quote unquote hell in a handbasket. I think we will figure things out. Let's switch venues to the classroom and the sports field, and maybe we need to separate them. But I want to move to that because we've talked about parenting our children. We've talked a little bit about children in the classroom and children on the sports field. But let's talk to the coaches out there, the athletic amateur coaches. Let's talk to the educators and teachers in the classrooms from kindergarten to high school. Um, how can they change the way they coach and teach to follow more of the philosophy that you espouse or the effort over results philosophy to build more resilient, more confident athletes and students? Because I was a teacher for 5 years in the early 2000s, so 2000 to 2005. And I was militaristic. I was going to get the best out of these kids, and some kids it worked. But then now I'm looking back, going, man, I was kind of a jerk, because I tried to teach every kid like they were the same. Now, when you have 35 kids in the classroom, sometimes you do that because you're having to teach to the middle. But how can teachers change the way they approach the classroom setting or coaches on the sports field with the psychology that you've learned in parenting children to build and grow more resilient kids?
Mhm, mhm. So it's great that we already touched on parenting style because
Yep.
when we talk about parenting, coaching, teaching, the concept of that authoritative or I prefer to say amazing style applies across all of those. And the concept is that you form this connection by being warm and supportive. And that will then bring out the best in your students or your kids or your athletes, and they need structure. And so there's a lot of structure in coaching. There's quite a bit of structure in teaching already set up with the different areas that they have to touch throughout the day, the different activities that they have scheduled throughout the day. And then parents can build a lot of structure into their days as well. And that's how you find that balance. You have the structure, you have the expectation. This is what we do here. And if you can find that balance of having that warmth, having that structure, that's going to help you as a coach, as a teacher, as a parent. I have a lot of teachers who watch my YouTube videos and say, I don't have kids, but this is exactly what I do with my students, and it works so well. And the idea is you have connection leading to cooperation, you have connection before correction. And so there's a lot of correction across all of these roles that we take on as adults. And if you first have the connection with the kids, you come to them with warmth, you come to them with respect, you show them that they are worthy, circling back to that unconditional positive regard, they are worthy just for showing up, being themselves, and that they are part of the team. They get that sense of belonging. All these things build their resilience, and then they're able to overcome those little challenges of losing the game. They're able to take that critique and not see it as criticism, instead, see it as a part of the learning experience because you're teaching them a growth mindset. You're saying, hey, that was awesome. You practiced so many free throws the other day and you made it during the game. And that was so great. Let's keep practicing and see how many you can get next week. And so it's a growth experience. It's not a, how come you didn't get more free throws? It's not placing blame. It's not judgment. It's focusing on progress, praising the effort, and also acknowledging the outcome. And oh, that led to this better outcome. Amazing, right? And so it's pairing that warmth with the high expectations that works across all those areas of where we interact with kids.
Especially for athletic coaches, can you marry two personalities of a coach that is still demanding, still wanting to win? Now, I suggest that under the age of 10, we shouldn't be keeping score in wins and losses. Like that shouldn't happen till 11. A lot of American parents would hate me for saying that. But how do you find that coach that still wants to win without it being the messaging that we have to win at all costs and that it's all about winning, but still, obviously, you want success for your team and you still want to get the best out of your team. You still want to demand effort from your athletes, but marry it to that warm, compassionate style as well. And I feel I'm looking back at because I coached for 25 years, basketball, track and field, football, hockey, lots of sports, soccer. And what my approach was, and I think my athletes would say this, was it's like, yeah, you were hard on us, but we never took it, it was never personal.
Mhm.
And we always knew, and you always had a light, fun side to you too, that we knew, realized that it wasn't all just about, militaristic grinding, right? So is there a possibility to marry the two?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say the key principles here would be honesty and
Mm,
expectation. So you're teaching a growth mindset, but you're not trying to um, trick your kids into thinking, "Hey, I don't want you to win." That's not part of it. It's part of saying, "Hey, the process is what it's most important, but the process leads to the outcome, and we love the outcome." You can be honest and say, "It feels good to win." And I think that one thing we can do to help us win those games is to work a little harder in these areas. And so that's when, you acknowledge the outcome, you acknowledge that's something we all want, but you don't make it all about winning. You don't say we have to win every time. So it's subtle wording changes. You know, it'll be awesome if we can win that game next week. And let's do this to help get ready so that we have a better chance of winning. You're saying that instead of we're going to win that game next week or else we're going to have to do extra drills, right? There's no punishment. There's praising the process, not punishing if you don't meet the outcome. So that's the honesty part. And then the expectation is really clearly defining what's expected of you as a member of this team. So let's go back to the baseball team. So
mm,
this is what's expected of you. Expect you to come to this percentage of practices. I expect you to give a really solid effort. I understand you guys are young, we're having fun, we want to talk a little bit, but I want you to be paying attention most of the time. And if I call your name specifically, I want you to look at me right away and acknowledge that I looked at you. I'm just spitballing here, but the things that you as a coach might want on that team. And you list off a reasonable number. You don't want to overwhelm them, but you list off a reasonable number of expectations. And maybe you even get it down to your 5 core values. So maybe you're talking about, um, let's see, responsibility. So showing up on time,
yep.
being at the games, having all your gear with you, respect. We respect each other. We acknowledge everybody's effort, whether they're winning or losing that day. We respect each other. And then effort. So we put high effort into every practice. So maybe you come up with a set of values, and this completely echoes a process that I use in parent coaching. And so I teach a concept called the family mantra, where I encourage families to come up with their 5 core values. And
Mhm.
there's a reason to do five. It's a reasonable number. It's within your typical person's working memory that they can easily remember 5 things. And so you come up with family values. We came up with one years and years ago. So our Emerson 5 is happy, kind, respectful, helpful, gentle. And my kids helped me come up with that when we were in the thick of those stay-at-home mom years. And the family mantra is great because it helps to instill in your children your family values. So instead of just having these nebulous expectations for them, they know what's expected of them on a daily basis. And it helps keep parenting positive because you can then just quickly remind them, hey, what's our Emerson 5? Before we go into a restaurant, before they go to a play date, when they start to be a little rough with their sibling, and you want to remind them, hey, remember the Emerson 5? Oh, yeah, that gentle one. It's a little reminder. It keeps parenting positive instead of no hitting. It's be gentle. And so there's so many benefits to the family mantra. And you can translate this to coaching by having your coaching mantra. And so you can have the 5. The reason I love 5 too, it's in addition to being easy to remember, it also sets you up for a great physical reinforcement. So, hey, what's
Right.
our coaching values? And so you list them off. Yes, high five. And you can high five the whole team if you got a whole team. So everybody gets that reinforcement. You said the values, you get a high five. And so it becomes this mantra where you just constantly repeat it and it becomes internalized. And it helps to create these clear expectations for your team about what's expected of them every day. And then it's amazing. They really start to live up to those expectations.
Yeah. I think the parents need more of that speech than the kids do. Because having coached a lot of youth sports teams, it's more often the parents that are the problem because you have a wide variety of parents that some of them are the win at all cost type parents. It's my kid's the best player, they should get the most playing time, things like that. And you have to have that conversation with what your philosophy is as a coach before the season even starts, and it has to be non-negotiable, and you hand it to them in black and white on paper saying this is how I coach, this is how playing time is determined, yada yada yada, right? But I like what you said about the family mantra and applying that to teams as well. I want to ratchet it up to the employment sector because who I work with is leaders in business, so CEOs, leadership, upper management, middle management to a certain extent, and I bring the EOR philosophy to them just as I would to speaking to athletic coaches, to teachers, to parents, because it transcends the boundaries of all. If I was to bring Dr. Lindsay Emerson into one of my CEO presidents roundtables to speak to a group of leaders who are owners, founders of companies, how do you take your parenting psychology philosophy and now apply it in the workplace?
Mhm. I love that you asked this, Quentin, because I've listened to your past episodes and they're much more related to business. You're
Right.
talking to CEOs. I know you're shifting gears this season to focus more on family matters. But I was listening to those episodes and it just reminded me so much of some of the parenting philosophies that I use. And it's amazing how much they tie in together. So, in parenting, to actually be that authoritative, amazing parent, the term that I like to use with my parents is to be the loving authority figure. And so if you put on your hat every morning and you say, I'm going to be the loving authority figure today, that's how you find that perfect balance between warmth and expectations that psychology research consistently shows us leads to the best outcomes for kids and leads to happier families. And so in the business world, you can take that exact same role. You can be the loving authority figure. And I often, with my parents, help them to kind of understand what this looks like in real life by using the analogy. Imagine if you had a new job and you showed up at your job and your boss didn't tell you what to do today. And they didn't praise you when you did something well. And they didn't give you feedback when you didn't do something well. You would feel lost and you would feel insecure. So that's how kids feel. They're at a new job. Their job is life, right? And so for them, they need to be taught what to do. They need SOPs. They need to be praised when they do something right, and they need to be offered constructive, gentle feedback when they do something wrong. And so with your focus on CEOs, I would try to teach them that the same concept applies, that instead of authoritarian parenting, we want amazing parenting. And instead of authoritarian CEOs, we want amazing CEOs, those who form meaningful connections with their employees, while pairing that with high expectations.
Mhm.
And you can set your employees up for success by clearly communicating your expectations, things like the family mantra, each business has its own values. And so, really clearly communicating the values, really articulating the steps that you expect them to take every day, praising them when they do that right, and then using that concept of unconditional positive regard to provide gentle corrective feedback. And having, again, high expectations that they then respond to that feedback. Setting a parameter for when you expect to see change and exactly what that change will look like. And the more you can clearly lay that out in a loving way, an unconditional positive regard way, obviously it's a different relationship with your employee, but they're still a
Mhm.
valued person. So it's the loving authority figure in parenting. Maybe you use a slightly different term for the CEOs. Maybe you call it the warm authority figure or something, something
Well,
like
we do talk about
respectful.
compassion. Yeah, we talk
Yeah,
about compassion and empathy in
compassion.
well, and here's what people and thank you for that answer. But here's what people don't realize. Well, maybe they do realize it, but in 2026 and moving forward, AI is going to replace a lot of people in the workplace. Okay, there is only so much human connection that we get right now in the workplace. And the control and demand philosophy of the late 1900s, early 2000s of employers, of employees, isn't going to work. It just won't work anymore because what Gen Z did, and I applaud them for this, although there's a few situations where I think they went too far, but Gen Z basically they talked with their feet. They said, "We're not staying here if you're going to treat us like we're just some number." And they would go to a job and they'd work for, 3 months, 6 months, unfortunately for someone maybe even 3 weeks, and they'd be like, "Nope, this is not a psychologically safe environment for me. I don't really want to work here and provide you with my energy, so I'm going to go somewhere else." And companies are starting to realize that they're losing employees left and right. And it's the companies that are moving towards the compassionate, empathetic, psychologically safe environments that are keeping their people. Their people are working harder. And here's the example I give, Lindsay. Every adult that I speak to, public speaking, or if I'm doing leadership workshops or whatever, every adult I speak to, I say, I want you to think about that coach or teacher, or maybe even aunt or uncle that you knew growing up, that you absolutely just adored because they made you feel safe. They really reinforced the things that you could do, and they really focused on the effort you put in. And you would, for me, the way I described it with my football coaches was I would run through a brick wall for that coach because I did not want to disappoint them. There's teachers, your favorite teachers. It wasn't what they were teaching, it was the classroom environment they provided you so that when you walked through that door, you felt safe.
Mhm.
You felt like you really could do no wrong, and that as long as you put in a good effort, you were appreciated for that, and you were recognized for that. Same thing when my child goes to a sports field and they walk onto that practice field, I want them to be excited to do it because that coach has control of the environment, provides a psychologically safe environment. Same thing for parents with children. You can see the children who aren't in psychologically safe environments. You know who they are because you can feel it coming off of them. Same thing goes for employment now. So there are a lot of employers out there right now that will say, "Oh, this is all kumbaya bullshit," right? And it's woo woo. And it's not my job to parent these kids. My job is to basically give them a job and a paycheck. Sorry, boomer, that and Gen X to a certain extent doesn't work anymore. So what's your response to that very long-winded statement, but how all of these arenas, so parents and children, students and teachers, coaches and athletes, and now employers and employees, that it is the amazing parenting style for employers that is going to be the wave of the future for the next few decades?
Right. So this reminds me, your question reminds me of a discussion I had recently with a friend who works in HR. And so
Mhm.
she really opened my eyes to what HR is. And I always thought of it as the place you go for complaints, harassment issues,
Yeah,
or the person who fires people.
yeah.
And she really opened my eyes to say, really, it's anything that affects how the people function in my workplace. And so she's constantly doing little research experiments. What's going to get these people to work better? What's going to get us towards our outcome? What's going to make them happier so they stay longer? And there are so many factors that go into the workplace, but one that you can really control is the climate. Those
Mhm.
values that you set, the daily expectations that you set, the way you interact with people as a CEO, and then you expect each of your managers below you to interact with the people that they manage.
Mhm.
And you can change that climate and see huge changes in all those HR type factors. And when you look from the overarching goal of the business, you want people to stay there longer. You don't want to be constantly training people. You want people to be happy so they stay there longer. You want people to be putting in effort to care about their work, to want to get towards the next goal. And changing just the overall climate of how you interact with them can do that. And it can help so much. Well, circling way back to your resiliency questions. So, one of the strongest factors in a child's resiliency is having warm parental influence. So, just coming from a maternal warmth environment, paternal warmth matters too, but more of the studies focus on maternal warmth.
Mhm.
And if you have high maternal warmth in your home environment, you are more likely to be a resilient person. And so you can translate to the work environment. You bring that warmth, that support in addition to having high expectations, and you're going to find that your employees are more resilient. They'll stick with you through troubles in the company. They're not going to leave the second that something offends them. They're going to talk to you because they're going to know that you're willing to talk it through with them, that you're responsive to their needs while having the high expectations along the way. So it's really a critical factor.
Um, there's I didn't make this statement, but it's basically people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad leaders.
Mhm, mhm,
And that goes back to the psychologically safe environment. And when I use the term psychologically safe environment with CEOs and with leaders, I get a lot of eye rolls, a lot of like, "Ugh, here we go," type responses because they think it's soft. They
mhm,
think it's weak. And there is a way, just like I asked you earlier about how can a coach demand the best out of their players and still win championships, but not be that authoritarian dictator,
mhm,
right? Same thing goes for the workplace. How do we still get results that we want? Well, once again, it's clarity. We still want to define what are the things we are trying to achieve. We still need quarterly goals and KPIs and metrics, but now it goes down to what are the efforts we want our people to put in? Are they putting those efforts in daily, and or are we providing with an environment to succeed?
mhm, mhm.
That's not
Yeah,
soft.
no,
That just spells success in the end. It may take a little longer, especially for those companies who have been the authoritarian dictator for a while, and it'll take a little bit of time, but a lot of business owners will say, I don't have that kind of time. We'll be losing money left and right. I got to stick with what I know.
mhm,
I get
mhm.
it.
Yeah, I get it. And it sounds soft. The terms just make it sound a little
Right.
soft, psychologically safe. That makes you think we're walking on eggshells. We can't
Yeah.
hurt people's feelings. But that's not the essence of it. The essence of it is people can respond to feedback. They can make progress. They can do what you want them to do. But you have to remember that they're people with feelings and they want to feel valued. They want to feel like they belong, that they fit in, they're in the right place, and that they are capable of making the change that you want them to make. So you teach them with a growth mindset, you use unconditional and positive regard, and you help them to work harder. You can say things like, "Hey, I know that you are an outstanding programmer. This code didn't come out quite right, and I'm wondering what we should work on to get it there the next time. What specific steps do you think we should work on together? How can I support you on this?" So getting goals, having the expectation, but doing it in a gentle, respectful way. I mean, really, you could say all this just comes down to respect, right? Respecting people's feelings, using respectful words, respecting that each person needs to feel valued. Mhm.
Let's start to wrap things up, Lindsay. Um, Effort over results philosophy. I think we've determined that the parenting psychology and the philosophy that you bring to your clients and to your practice is very much in line with the effort over results philosophy, which means that what we are professing is not necessarily new. I think it's more relevant and let me use a big term, ubiquitous, meaning everybody can hear it and see it more now today than they could say 10 years ago, 30 years ago, and 40 years ago. So our philosophy centers on effort over results. How would you tie the term effort over results to the way you work with your parents and children in your practice? Where would you use that term and what does it mean to you?
Right. I would say that effort over results is a key component of an amazing parenting style. That having that concept in mind allows you to view your child as someone who's not trying to make your life harder, but rather is going through a hard time. And so you can support them by seeing how much effort they're putting into it and giving them assistance when they need it, when they're not quite to a developmental level yet that they can do it on their own. And by encouraging them when you know it's something that they are capable of and giving them the tools that they need to get to that next level. But remembering overall that our children are constantly learning and that it's our job to help support them along the way, to praise that effort and not just praise the individual results that they're receiving. Get them to the point where they internalize the value of hard work and how important that's going to be throughout their lifespan.
Love that. I love that. Let's finish on this question. What influenced you to go into the practice of parenting psychology and to get your PhD? What was it in your life from your background that really inspired you to do the work you do today?
Oh, that's a great question. So I had sort of an circuitous little trajectory into this current business of mine. So I always knew I wanted to go to graduate school. My mother graduated with a master's and what they call ABD, all but dissertation. She was this close to getting her dissertation. And I always thought, I'm going to completely finish school and then become a mom. That was always in my plan because becoming a mom was part of the reason she didn't finish the dissertation. So I always knew I wanted to be a mom, but I also knew I was going to finish school entirely. And psychology was the first um, subject material that ever interested me enough to say, okay, I could do this for college and beyond. So I went into college as a psychology major, took as many classes as humanly possible, went straight into my PhD program, got my dissertation done, finished graduate school. And in psychology, you do a postdoctoral internship as well to while you're getting your licensure hours. And so then I became licensed in clinical psychology and literally had my first child 2 months later. so, so I had years of practicing and doing research during all of my training, taught at the University of San Diego for a while. And at that time, I was focused on severe mental illness. And
Mm,
I have to just honestly tell you that most of the reason why I was interested in severe mental illness is because I have a family history of psychosis. I have a brother with schizophrenia. And once you see severe mental illness, in my experience, it's hard to then dedicate your life to what's sometimes called the worried well, like minor
mm,
issues. Minor anxiety, minor depression can be very impairing individually, but it's just fundamentally different than schizophrenia, than bipolar disorder, and then some of these really catastrophic illnesses. So that's what drew me into my research area, and then clinical research doing cognitive behavioral therapy for schizophrenia. But then I completely left the field of psychology while I had my kids. I always knew I wanted to be a completely devoted stay-at-home mom. And so I did that until my youngest was in second grade. It was meant to be kindergarten, but then COVID happened and needed to be more present at home for those couple of years, responding afterwards. So second grade, my youngest went to school, and that's when I said, "Okay, going back to work. I've got this period of time when the kids are at school," and over that really 14 years prior, I saw firsthand when I was in the thick of the trenches of stay-at-home mom life and with, I have 4 kids, so 4 kids, each 2 years apart. We're at the parks every day, we're doing the activities, we're doing the play dates, and I interacted with so many parents And it became so clear to me that there were basic strategies that I had pulled from my knowledge of psychology, not my PhD knowledge, really more intro psych classes, very basic human development, and pulled those strategies and kind of formulated into them what I call the 5 C's for amazing parenting. So, this overarching parenting framework of how I approach parenting. And those basic strategies made my life so much simpler as a busy stay at home mom. And I saw other parents struggling with them. And I saw how easily I could just teach a mom. I don't go out and say, "Hey, do you want to learn something?" But when parents would come to me and say, "How do you seem so calm? Why do your kids actually listen to you?" And I would see the need for these strategies. And so I started teaching individually when people consulted me here in town, and then developed my whole program and then brought it online when I went back to work. And it has been amazing to be able to share this knowledge of psychology backed strategies, simple shifts that parents can make in how they interact with their kids on a daily basis. And so now I do this full time as a parent coach, and I love it.
Lindsay, where can people find you? I've had an enjoyable time today talking to you about this because it really does reinforce the effort over results philosophy. So I want people to know where they can find you online, on social medias. Go ahead, let's promote you.
Oh, thanks, Quinn. Yeah, I have loved being here with you. It's amazing how much my parent coaching program aligns with your effort over outcomes, just philosophy. So people can find me at Dr. Lindsay Emerson on all my socials. And I have a podcast too. It's not an interview based podcast, but it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. So it's a great place to get weekly parenting tips.
So this conversation really did highlight how powerful it can be when parents, coaches, educators focus less on outcomes and more on the effort, growth, and emotional development of our kids. Thank you, Lindsay, for being here today. To our listeners, thank you for being part of the kickoff to season 2 as we continue exploring child development through the effort over result lens. Everybody, have a great day. Always put in your best effort.